casualty of the pandemic, which has huge economic consequences, but also social ones as well, is the festival which takes place, or should take place, in many parts of Europe, Latin America and North America too, on this weekend. It's called Carnival in Venice, and in Rio de Janeiro and New Orleans as well. It's called Fasching in Munich, and Carnival as well in Cologne, and many parts of the southern Netherlands as well, Maastricht being one of the cities which celebrates Carnival with particular enthusiasm. And I'm afraid that the pandemic has put the tin hat on that. It was for many centuries the prelude to Lent in Catholic countries. Everybody dressed up, put on masks, had an awful lot of fun, and everybody was anonymous. So everybody was participating in the exuberance and the joy and the music and the drinking and everything that went with the self-indulgence to excess which marked Carnival in so many places. But the Piazza San Marco in Venice is totally deserted, unfortunately, this weekend. The same will be true of Cologne and Munich. And it's ironic that everybody is wearing masks now, but not those carnivalesque, amusing, funny masks which are so much a part and parcel of the pre-Lenten exuberance and festivities. Now, what made them indeed so important and attractive was that everybody was anonymous, everybody was dressed up, and so people were able to hide behind their masks. Everybody belonged, even for a short couple of days. In Munich, or I think it's Cologne, on Rosenmontag, which will be tomorrow, all the men who were wearing ties, the women had the right to cut them off. And so I think that most sensible men in Cologne on Rosenmontag went about without their cravat. But there was a liberty, there was a freedom, there was a sense of common enjoyment, which says something, I think, in general about society throughout the year. We all somehow want to belong, we want to be part and parcel of it. And as our societies become more pluralistic and even our parish communities become more cosmopolitan, that sense of belonging becomes a little bit more complicated. Not everybody necessarily has English, for example, as their first language here at Our Lady in St. Anne. Not everybody was born in this country. And indeed, even the English-speaking people, some who were born here and grew up and spent their whole lives in this parish, but many others came from other parts of the country or other parts of the world. So one of the great challenges in any parish community is to include people, to do things in such a way that everybody feels at home, to open the door wide so that each person coming in and crossing our threshold feels welcome. But inevitably, for one reason or another, be it that people are shy, that people are inhibited, that people have a fear of not being accepted, that challenge is always there before every Christian community. Now, the Galilee in which Jesus began to minister, and of which he was a native itself, was known as the Galilee of the nations. Judea, the other main province of Palestine, was much more homogeneous. It was populated almost completely by Jews and devout Jews as well. Think of the crowds that came to the Jordan to hear John the Baptist and respond to his call to conversion. But Galilee was much more mixed. There were Greek-speaking people there. There were pagan colonies there as well of people from other parts of the Middle East. And one can imagine that even though Jesus did grow up in a village which was probably fairly homogeneous, he might have from an early age had contact with people of other languages, other races, other nationalities. And of course, deep in his heart, he wanted to preach the message of God's love to everybody, really, who had a receptive ear. He would have spoken in Aramaic. We have no idea whether he knew other languages, and the fact that he did engage Pontius Pilate in conversation, according to John's Gospel, doesn't really necessarily prove that Jesus was fluent in the Greek that was spoken by the ruling classes of Palestine at his time. And yet there was something about Jesus' voice, about his personality, about his whole approach to other people that attracted people to him. He didn't exclude anybody. Otherwise, why would those crowds, which Mark keeps telling us every week, gathered round Jesus and traveled long distances to see him? And in today's gospel, in the cure of the leper, we see a brilliant example of Jesus having pity for somebody who probably spent most of his time hiding himself from the population in general because of the disfiguring skin illness which he suffered from. And Jesus wanted not only to cure him, but also to enable him to reintegrate into society as a whole. It was an act of social rehabilitation. And we as a community, a parish community such as ours, small and modest though it may be, have that same duty to help everybody to understand and feel that they are included. Because, as St. Paul repeatedly assured those to whom he wrote his letters, we are all adopted children of God. God loves each and every one of us, and through Jesus Christ has made us not only sons and daughters of a loving God, but, that inevitable corollary, brothers and sisters of one another. And so, if we manage to see those others in our community as our brothers and sisters, then it's so much easier to make them feel welcome, to involve them in our life, and to make them feel not only that they belong, but that it's important to us that they have that sense of belonging. Now, Jesus cured the anonymous leper in today's gospel, but he really wanted to keep it quiet. It was almost if it was a private favor he was doing to this man, even though he realized that it had enormous public consequences for the man himself once he was cured of his leprosy and was able to hold his head high in the public street and engage in the life of society. So we then tend to ask ourselves, well, what was the purpose of Jesus? Mark tells us that he ran away, that he wanted to avoid the crowds, that he didn't want to become the focus of public attention. And yet, those crowds who followed him didn't let him isolate himself from them for a long time. In a sense, they wanted to integrate him into their world. Just as he rehabilitated the leper, so they too didn't want him to isolate himself from them. And perhaps as we stand on the vigil of Lent, even though we're not celebrating Carnival, it's not part of our tradition in this part of the world anyway, but the challenge might be for us to think about making a place for Jesus in our life, to somehow lower the threshold of access into our world by opening our minds that little bit more to his message and our hearts to the divine love of which he was the herald and which he manifested so clearly in the multiple acts of kindness which he performed and which Mark describes in his account of his public ministry. And getting to know Jesus and understand him is one of the ongoing challenges of any parish community. And the more we as a family are united in our focus on the Lord as our brother, as the herald of good news, as the envoy of God who is our common Father, the more we will find ourselves that we have one heart and one soul, and the less we will want to put anybody on the margins. I know that under these pandemic regulations, a number of people have had to be seated in the side aisles when they usually sat in the center aisle. And that's painful and difficult for many people. But perhaps the very fact that we are observing the regulations with such meticulous dedication invites us to resituate ourselves in our relationship to one another, to the parish community as a whole, and think again about being outside and being inside, being on the margins and being integrated. And that's the mystery at the heart of the miraculous cure of the leper. And we might think of all those people who this year in Cologne or in Munich or in Venice or in Rio that cannot celebrate Carnival, that cannot hide behind their masks, that cannot have fun. And think about the family that we are. We are wearing masks, oddly enough. But in fact, we know that the eyes of Jesus, which look at each and every one of us, sees beyond the mask and sees into our hearts. And maybe the challenge for us in this Lenten season is that we reawaken our relationship with our own heart, so that not only is it more open and receptive to the love of God on which we focus so much during Lent, but also to our brothers and sisters who may be sitting socially distanced but still close, a bench or two away, and remember that they too are our brother and our sister and the common child of a loving God.